The final talk will be by Mila from UCLA, it's Internet and Media Studies, and she's talking on exciting terror in Lao Ye's Summer Palace.
Lao Ye's Summer Palace is a film about desire, but it is difficult to watch. The director's characteristic handheld camera, his use of natural and dim lighting, and a mise-en-scène of cramped and messy living spaces throughout the film create an impoverished, unaesthetic that strains the eye. Meanwhile, the 2-hour, 20-minute narrative, plummeting into the female protagonist's abjection, becomes a kind of labor of spectatorial endurance. Spanning nearly 2 decades, the love affair between Beijing University students Yu Hong and Zhou Wei is set against the backdrop of international political drama. The two meet and have a torrid romance until the June 4th Tiananmen Square incident of 1989. That night, both young people get involved with the demonstrations, and Yu Hong also finds out that Zhou Wei has slept with her best friend. However, despite going their separate ways after these events, the lovers remain fixated on one another in heart and mind. Eventually, when Yu Hong is finally reunited with Zhou Wei in a tawdry motel, the two have nothing to say to each other and once again go their separate ways. The film is provocative in a narrative sense because of its apparent lack of cohesiveness and closure. Throughout the film, we watch as bodies wander aimlessly across various geopolitical spaces while engaging in anticlimactic social interactions and increasingly unerotic sex scenes. The restless, unrooted bodies comprise a disjunctive universe in which bodily self-possession becomes the sole act of agency. Although sex and politics are juxtaposed aggressively, and as most film journalists have noted, by the film's end, neither China nor Yu Hong is liberated. Relevant to those who participated in the defeated 1989 pro-democracy movement, Summer Palace asks the question, how do you resist oppression when all you have is a body? It also responds to this question by specifically staging the female body as the site of political protest in the film, and by constituting the film itself as a terrorizing body through its illicit emphasis on explicit sex and the Tiananmen incident, thereby provoking engagement with and condemnation from the Chinese state. Indeed, I believe the film's response to the question posed above is exciting terror. This phrase has multiple implications. Both as verb and adjective, exciting qualifies not only Yu Hong's erratic behavior and actions, but also describes her sexual entanglements, both of which result in her terrifying downward spiral into mute abjection by the end of the film. One of only 3 Chinese narrative films that deals overtly with the Tiananmen incident, this film is by far the most explicit and extensive in its representation of the event. The film banned in mainland China, and the filmmaker banned from making films for 5 years after exhibiting Summer Palace at the 2006 Cannes Film Festival without proper Chinese authorization, were likewise seen as ideological instruments of corruption by the Chinese State Administration of Radio, Film, and Television, hereafter SARF. Although SARF's official reason for the ban cited the lack of an international exhibition permit, Summer Palace would not have passed censorship guidelines anyway, not only because of its depiction of the June 4th incident, but also for its full frontal nudity and graphic sex scenes. In order to understand the film's obsession with bodies, as well as its provocative displeasure, Linda Williams' essay, Film Bodies, Gender, Genre, and Excess, offers a productive framework through which to make cultural sense of Summer Palace's generic excesses of pornography, horror, and melodrama. Williams writes, alone or in combination, heavy doses of sex, violence, and emotion are dismissed by one faction or another as having no logic or reason for existence beyond their power to excite. She goes on, however, to redeem the value in thinking through the apparent gratuity of these genres by arguing that these genres, quote, function as cultural problem solving. So I hope to ground the generic surplus of Summer Palace in some distinctly Chinese problems regarding gender, terror, and the state. For the sake of time, I'll only be discussing how the film makes use of the generic excesses of pornography, although in this paper's full version, I also address the film's exploitation of horror and melodrama. Summer Palace's pathological repetition of sex scenes, at first exciting because of their inherent prurient nature, begins to rupture the narrative ad nauseum, literally exciting disgust by the end of the film. Like the saccharine pop song playing at the club where Yu Hong and Zhou Wei dance together for the first time, the film repeats sex as if a trite chorus, with each repetition a dreary amplification of futility in satisfying the female protagonist's seemingly insatiable desires. The sex scenes, usually shot in the dark, are physically arousing, even if repulsively so. However, the pornographic nature of Summer Palace extends to both its taboo depictions of sex and to its taboo representation of the June 4th incident. In the eyes of the state, the intimate sightings of the body spectacle inscribed in both the film's sex and politics shows too much skin. Similar to the morally righteous rhetoric of the Hayes administration's 1930s production code in Hollywood, SARF's censorship criteria reflects the Communist Party's paternalistic ideology. So any film or television show with the following sex acts will be cut or altered. Quote, obscene and vulgar content, exposing scenes of promiscuity, rape, prostitution, sexual acts, perversion, homosexuality, masturbation, and private body parts. Ostensibly then, Summer Palace is pornography as it contains much of this illicit sexual content. And indeed, the cinematic fleshing out of female sexual desire in independent Chinese films is a strategically essentialist intervention that's meant to counter the legacy of asexual cultural revolutionary politics and the overall lack of sex education. What makes the pornographic aspect of Summer Palace most interesting, then, is its ideological significance in relation to party politics. As both the differentiated female body and explicit representations of sexual intercourse run counter to Chinese political correctness, vis-a-vis the socialistic rhetoric of equality and institutionalized knowledge about gender and sex. Thus, the film's full female nudity takes on a political charge as a form of biological terrorism. Summer Palace's naked female characters in the throes of sex, along with frequent high-angle shots of post-coital heterosexual couples laying nakedly side by side, lay bare the terrifying, dreadful sight of female sexuality and biological gender differentiation. Analogous to the hunger strike mobilized during the '89 movement, the body becomes the final, ultimate site of autonomy, and sadomasochism becomes the last desperate protest against government control of the individual. In Summer Palace, Yu Hong, stripped down to her nude body, engages in casual sex, resists the state censorship, control of bodies, and Chinese kinship practices. And thus, later in the film, Yu Hong leaves her husband, a doting man willing to forgive her sexual indiscretions with married men, and instead endures a painful abortion in order to resist a life of domestic, independent, phallocratic kinship. And although she's still in love with Zhou Wei, she won't end up forging a family with him either. In the film's longest sex scene between Yu Hong and Zhou Wei, an abrupt edit aggressively cuts to the couple on a picturesque boat outing, sublimating female orgasm in a feminine fantasy of romance. Indeed, the only time Yu Hong climaxes in the film is when she is alone, her restless body curling up on the dirty bottom of an empty swimming pool. And I have a clip that I will be speaking through a little bit. So this scene begins when Yu Hong's voiceover reads from her diary a list of things that she wishes she could tell Zhou Wei. So her voiceover says, "The most frightening thing happened again. I couldn't sit still or remain calm. I wanted to keep writing. All I could do is lie down and close my eyes." So we see her as she rides on the border between the deep and the shallow end of the empty pool until her breathing grows weaker, and she eventually loses consciousness, which you'll see. The film's most erotic scene, despite all the incredibly graphic sex scenes. So Yu Hong's sensual yet masochistic bodily movement suggests erotic pleasure in the act of writing, her desired political act given this particular historical context. Indeed, freedom of the written word was one of the primary demands of the 1989 student movement, a hugely significant stake for which people risked their lives. Preceding this sequence, Yu-Hong teaches her female dorm mate how to masturbate, and the pair also engages in sexual dalliance with 2 male students. These all precede the Tiananmen student protests, the last item on Yu-Hong's diary list. So I also want to show a clip where Mo is using actual footage that was taken during the 7-week protest that's been subsequently suppressed in the media and is censored. And he sutures this with the narrative film itself. Which express a kind of narcissistic individualism through love, in conjunction with Yu-Hong's condensed conflation of sex and protest, suggests that, in Lo Ye's words, quote, sexual and political freedom are more or less the same, end quote. In an interview given to the Toronto Star, Lo says of his protagonists, at that age, I think love and politics are very similar. The impulse, the passion, the emotion, and then after the high waves, the memories. Lo remarks, after '89, people felt like they had lost something, like they had broken up with a lover. Lo himself was a student at the Beijing Film Academy at that time, also participated in the protest, but was not there on the evening of June 4th when the martial law police officers opened fire on the protesters. In terms of Williams' structural temporality of pornography, Summer Palace ironically represents the on-time revelations or simultaneous coming together during the film's climax of Yu-Hong's double betrayal in both the state's military violence and her closest friend and Zhou Wei's affair. However, rather than pornography's utopian fantasy of perfect temporal coincidence during which sex partners attain climactic mutual pleasure, this scene acts out dystopian fantasies of ill-timed coincidence and displeasure for Yu-Hong. Derrida writes, theatricality must traverse and restore existence and flesh in each of their aspects. Thus, whatever can be said of the body can be said of the theater, and I would add also of cinema. By restoring the fleshy encounters of sex, violence, and emotion to cinematic spectatorship, the film cruelly forces us to confront our corporeal existence and its limitations as well as its pleasures. How then do we negotiate the displeasures of such politically provocative cinema with its generic excesses? What does it mean when we say we have a guilty pleasure for a genre film? Low, shameful genres like pornography, horror, and melodrama remind us of our involuntary bodily responses to film, alerting us to the fact that we take pleasure in them. However, Summer Palace, a film that embodies qualities from all 3 body genres, points to another kind of guilt altogether, historical guilt. Repressed history surfaces through explicit sex and critical politics, exploding through generic excess and across restless bodies. Indeed, Summer Palace mobilizes the guilty pleasures of genre toward a political agenda that demands China accept its responsibility for the mistakes of June 4th, 1989. Thank you.